You are listening to Talking Africa, your passport to understanding what is driving the news on the continent, brought to you by the Africa Report. My name is Nicholas Norbrook, and you can keep up with all the news from the continent by visiting our website, theafricareport.com, where you can sign up to our daily newsletter so you don't have to miss a beat. This week, we dive deep into what is happening in Sudan, the latest African giant to see a mass civilian movement drive a change of regime. To understand what's happening, I talked to Ahmed Soliman, who is a fellow at Chatham House in London, researching the Horn of Africa. We go into the military power structures, the significance of Sudan's switch of allegiance from Iran to the Gulf and Saudi Arabia, and the strong societal messages that are being articulated by this revolution, the sense of Sudanese unity that has impressed people the world over. So, does this really spell change for Sudan? One of the quotes that popped up, I think it was in a Times piece today, quoted a teacher, Salma Ali, who said, "They cut off the head," referring to the al-Bashir regime, "but the body is still there." Is that about right?
Yeah, I think that is about right. I think we're still in a situation where there is a lot of life still left in the previous regime. I mean, what we have is, I guess, if the two go together, it's cautious euphoria in Sudan about the future following the removal of President Bashir and many of his allies after 3 decades of rule. And I think a growing widespread belief that the political transition is moving in the right direction, and that the country will not return to another form of dictatorship. But there are, as that quote outlines, there are very serious concerns about the sincerity of the new transitional military council, including the intentions of some of the key individuals within that council, and chief among those being their willingness to cede authority to a civilian-led administration, their appetite for reform of the security institutions, which they have announced, particularly given that taking place from the inside with existing loyalties, and their ability to pursue genuine justice and accountability, including within their own ranks. There are also, I think, worries about how much patience and restraint security forces will continue to show the protesters. So I think from those, points, it's clear to see that yes, you can say that they've cut off the head, but the body is still there.
So when you look at the al-Bashir hardliners who remain in the military council, I guess the one which really pops out is the VP, known as Hemeti, former paramilitary commander linked to atrocities in Darfur. Are there others? And what kind of a block do you think they make within the military council?
I think there are a number that still remain, and I think it's also quite difficult to distinguish, between in an apolitical institution that the military should be between, those who are core insiders within the Islamist movement, and those who are seen to be, I guess, outside of the Islamist movement, but I guess still military people, armed force people, and you can distinguish between the two. And then there are also, I guess, the actions that have been committed in the conflict areas by a number of the security forces, as well as by the security services, in terms of the detention, torture, abuses committed against civilians who have been detained and imprisoned. So I think, individuals you can point at, certainly, and what we've seen now with Abdel Fattah Burhan coming in as the head of the military transition is the replacement of Lieutenant General Ahmed Ibn Auf. Ibn Auf, of course, formerly Minister of Defense and Vice President, was a very politicized individual who wasn't accepted or acceptable to the protesters. Now, he has been retired from what I can see at the moment. You also have the likes of Salah Ghosh, the head of the National Intelligence and Security Services, who has stepped down from his position and been replaced. But there is no discussion currently going on about whether or not there will be any charges brought against those individuals. So while you have a number of people detained, like Ahmed Haroun from the former acting party chairman until the regime was removed, and influential former Islamists such as Nafi Ali Nafi and Bashir's former deputy Ali Osman Taha, these people seem to have been detained, but we don't know the outcome. Of course, that is something that will be known later on, and as things progress. But there is a bit of lack of clarity with regards to which officials are going to be encouraged to walk into the night, and others who might be detained for various charges and prosecuted in future for those.
How important in that context is the decision by the African Union's Peace and Security Council to give the military council a sort of 15-day deadline, as it were, to hand over to civilian rule?
I think it's a very useful step from the AUPSC, from the African Union itself, to be that strong, and to outline that what it wants to see is a move in a very short period of time towards a civilian administration in the country. So that's, I think, a hugely important marker, and one which perhaps changes the picture for the Military Transitional Council. However, I don't think necessarily that the Military Council will be in any rush to do this. I think that still that they there is a critical issue here about whether the Military Council want to monopolize power and ultimately replace one military leadership with another, or whether power will be shared with and then transferred to a transitional civilian government. So I think the Transitional Military Council have clearly come out very openly and tried to reach out to Sudanese people and the protesters and say that they have no ambitions to hold on to power, and that they are only the guardians of this, Sudan, and want to see the legitimate aspirations of the people realized. They've also begun to hold meetings with a range of political parties in order to chart solutions for moving Sudan towards this legitimate civilian-led government. So they can point to that. But what I think will be important is to outline the period for which this takes place, because at the moment there is a real divergence between what the protesters and the Sudanese Professional Association and the Forces for the Declaration for Freedom and Change are wanting, and what the Military Transitional Council have set out. And I think that there does need to be a narrowing of the space between those two, and the suggestion of having a civilian council that works, that has military involvement or is aligned with the military moving forward during a transitional period, I think is one which it would be able to bridge this current impasse, and where we see continued involvement for the military in being able to secure, I guess, the stability of the country and provide oversight as a guarantor over the transitional period and process.
What one of the things that's been very interesting, and there's been parallels in lots of other countries in the continent, but it does look like, middle ranking or junior officers on the one side, and the senior generals on the other, and there's this split in the army. What are the various structures within the army? I know quite early on the Air Force, for example, came over onto the side of the protesters. What for you are the sort of the big structural components of the armed forces, and what's the dynamic there? Which way are they headed?
Well, at the moment, you have, I think, as you rightly point out, you have the regular armed forces, the army, and we have seen quite clearly during the last few weeks, particularly since the 6th of April protest, and when we saw 100,000 protesters marching towards the Sudanese army headquarters to commemorate the anniversary of the uprising that removed Jafar Nimeri, and calling for the military support to remove the regime. I think we've seen that there have been divided loyalties within the armed forces. The people reached out to the army, and we saw that there was a division between the middle-ranking officers in the army, and in also in the Air Force, and that political leadership. So we've seen that subsequently play out on the streets. So the army remains important, but as we can see, there is a division there between its leadership and those middle-ranking officers. They have tried to close that division, or provide more unified force, unified face, I should say, particularly with the removal of Ibn Auf and the former chief of staff, and also the promotion of Burhan, someone who has been noted is less of a political figure and not an Islamist either. So this is one area. You also have the rapid support forces led by General Mohammed Hamdan Hemeti, and of course they have become an increasingly significant part of the picture during the protests as we've seen them, and they have, I think, benefited from a strategic decision taken by Hemeti to not move in and try and disperse the protesters, and also his role in also removing President Bashir, decision to remove President Bashir, as well as the decision to remove Ibn Auf by saying that his RSF forces wouldn't be a part of the military transitional council moving forward. So he has been very smart, very tactical.
Do you think he struck a deal with Abdul Rahman?
Yes, I do. I think they have a deal. I think it is become clear that they have a partnership, one which is, has very clearly predated this current military transitional council. They have worked together with, in terms of particularly overseeing the Sudanese forces in Yemen, and I think we're seeing an alliance here between those two, which is developed and which has led to Hemeti taking the VP role in the transitional council at the moment. So his rise has been extremely significant, and he's played a very important role, I think, in this revolution so far, and in the removal of the previous regime. And I think that is why some people are calling for him and the RSF in particular to be